this is one of the most exciting interviews that I've done, because this is Erin Hart. She is the administrator of three schools, the Early Learning Center and the elementary school and the high school, Three Rivers. I remember early on when a group of parents proposed that we start a Christian school. And it was like a huge task that they had in front of them. And here you are, how long has school been going?
57 years this year, total.
That is amazing. Well, when did the school start?
In 1965, and I love this story, Dr. Jim Conrad, who was the original pastor of the American Baptist Church. Yeah. They had one meeting, and I think they had maybe 20 members at the time, but they had this one meeting, they all got together and they said, we think God's calling us to start a Christian school and low-income senior housing. And
at the same time?
At the same time. And they voted and said, we're going to do this. And it was like,
oh my gosh.
As he said, it was crazy in retrospect that they had thought they had any right to do that. But, now 57 years later, there's Three Rivers Christian School and Campus Towers, and both are expanding in their own way. And both have had this legacy in the community of providing for, as they said, we want to provide for the widows and the orphans. And what does that look like?
That is so cool.
But the school started originally as a preschool because there was no real organized preschool in Cowlitz County. And as Dr. Jim and his wife Barbara would tell it, all these families were going back to work. They had just built the Terry Taylor addition that's near our main campus, and women are expected to be back in the workplace. The dual income household is starting to get to be more the norm, and yet there's no place for these women to bring their children. And so one of the members of the church reached out to Barbara Conrad, who's now gone on to heaven, and said to her, I don't have a place for my kids. And she said, well, we need to start a preschool. So they started with just a couple of rooms in the church, and within a year they had 100 kids, and within another year they were getting complaints from the public school that they were teaching kids to read too early. And so her response and sort of this stubbornness was like, well, we're just going to keep doing it. So literally our buildings on this campus were built incrementally, a little bit at a time, as they would add grade levels. And then in the mid-90s, I think, is when they added the high school. That's what you were talking about. A group of parents got together because the school at that time went through 8th grade, and they said, we really want our kids to be able to go through high school,
right,
which seemed like an insurmountable kind of thing and was not easy to get started. High schools have so many facets, and I think they started with a group of maybe 40 kids, and now we have 140 kids, and it's been I think not an easy thing to go through to start a school like that, but definitely a worthy thing to go through. I think they see the fruit that's been born out of that in generations. And now, I have people that I've hired that graduated from our high school, 15 years ago, that are doing things on campus. It's kind of cool to see that legacy sort of follow through. I was 4 years old when my dad decided, my two older sisters were in public school. He was not enjoying that, but he was a state trooper. He didn't really have a lot of income, and he came down here. Jim Chenoweth was the head of school at the time, and said, I really want to try Christian school. And I grew up 5 houses down the street, so I think in my dad's mind too, it was like, they can walk to school, this is fine. I was a little young for kindergarten, but I was reading, so they were like, let's just start this out. Anyway, my sisters and I started here, and I stayed here. At the time, the school only went through 6th grade, so that was in the 80s. I loved my school here. This felt like community. This felt like, of course, growing up down the street, I used to ride my bike along here. And I remember when I had to go to public school in 7th grade, I remember literally, riding my bike and crying, in the summertime, like, I don't want to go to the new school, and praying to the Lord, why do I have to leave this place? And now I laugh at that because I'm like, 40 years later, here I am. God was listening and just delayed the answer to that prayer a few decades. But it was, for me, it was a huge shift. And I had a relatively good public school experience, but it was that, wow, this is not the same thing. Like I saw what Christian schooling was in my life as a young student, and then I saw what I was missing. And I went to both public and Christian colleges through my later years, but always missed that. And when it came time for me to have a place for my children, that's how I reconnected here. And then Jim Chenoweth asked me to work, and that was 13 years ago. And I thought I'd be here maybe a year, but now here I am. I think everybody knows, at least anecdotally, like school is not like it was when I was a kid, right? We all kind of say that.
But I don't know if many of us put it into words.
No, but I don't think most people spend time thinking about why that's the case. Yeah. And I mean, of course, we all live in a world now where we have a device in our pocket that has, every written document since the beginning of time, probably access to that, right? We know that it's not so much important that kids memorize things or have a certain just baseline of knowledge and skills. They need to know what to do with all of that information. Like, it used to be that a lot of what we could teach in school was, the ABCs, 1, 2, 3, all that kind of like just the baseline of how are they going to be good citizens. But now people are saying, no, we have to, what are kids going to do with all this knowledge, like good or bad?
Right.
People are admitting more and more there's a moral foundation that we need to give kids when they, and this is even in the secular realms where people are saying, no, we've got to at least give children a baseline so they know what to do with this huge amount of knowledge. How do they respect other people? How do they take care of the environment? Things that people are concerned about right now. From a faith-based perspective, we know there's a huge responsibility. I mean, the Bible, we were talking about that earlier. When we say train up a kid, that's a pretty intense term of like, what does that mean? Eugene Peterson, in one of his books, talks about how the term training up, if you go back to the actual language, which I'm not an exegetical scholar, but this always stuck with me, it really has to do with like welcoming and community. It was a word that was used for midwives when they would rub the gums of infants to get them used to nursing and then eating hard food, right? This whole idea of like, you're preparing and welcoming a kid into the world, right? We think of it, when I brought that verse up with my daughters, they're like, are you talking about training a dog? Train up a kid. Like they always hated that term, but it really is, no, it's about welcoming and preparing. How do we welcome and prepare our children to take their place in the world, especially if we're telling them, we want you to be leaders in the church. We want you to go love and serve other people. How do we give them the tools to do that? I mean, we can't just, we've learned setting people loose and saying, go serve Jesus, and not training them on what that means doesn't usually result in success. So,
well, you do outreaches, don't you? I mean, where you take children from the school like to other places.
Yeah.
We would never have thought of that when I was going to school.
Well, and I think that's become, in the last 10 years that I've been here, we always had this great mission statement that we prepare students to impact the world for Christ. And probably about 8-9 years ago, I had a conversation with the school board. Impact the world for Christ. Like, this is some lofty language. Are we really, maybe we just want to say impact Cowlitz County for Christ. Like, what does that mean? And they were like, no, if that's who we are, we need to live that out. And so born out of that program were two things. One, or out of the mission statement, were two programs. One was, we now have international students intentionally every year. We don't charge a huge amount of money for international students to come here like most schools do. We try to charge as close to the domestic tuition as possible, just along with the expenses for them to live here. So we usually have at least 10, 12 international students every year from all over. I had no idea. Yeah, we have kids from, this year we have a student from Kenya. We have another, like 2 from Germany, 2 from Italy, 1 from Belgium, a couple from Korea, China. In past years we've had, Taiwan, Japan. Anyway, that's an important part of our program that we've grown over time. We have families who serve as host families consistently for those students, and to us it's kind of like reverse missions. Most of those kids they don't know anything about Christianity, or it's something that's merely like decorative or kind of like in the past, and they come to this Christian school where Bible's a required topic, plus it's the thread that unites every topic. And then we have chapel once a week, and they're with host homes that are probably going to church on Sunday. Like, it's amazing to watch lives transformed and those kids go back to their countries with a very different view of what Christianity is. But then by the same token, we also take kids out. We do these service learning trips. We call them impact trips every year, like the mission statement, impact the world for Christ. Yeah. And the goal there is kids can't take their cell phone with For 2 weeks, they're going somewhere in the world to love and serve others. And it looks differently. You know, sometimes like we took a group to the Philippines and they built a basketball court at this school. We've taken kids to Cambodia, Ecuador, New Orleans, Washington, D.C. I took kids to Northern Ireland last year, which was actually one of the first times we've done a trip like this in what's deemed a first world country.
Yeah.
And for kids, they were all like, what are we going to do? Like, this looks like the UK. Like, this doesn't look like poverty or obvious ways that we can serve. But you know, Northern Ireland's been torn apart by this Protestant Catholic divide.
Right.
And for the kids to see that firsthand, to walk through neighborhoods, to talk to people that religion and the exercise of it has almost ruined their lives.
Yeah.
And to see, you know, we prayed around the peace walls, and we went to both a Catholic church service and a Protestant church service. And then we did service in different areas of the community. And, you know, we'd have these conversations with people on the streets. And they'd say, where are you from? And we're from a Christian school. And they're like, is that Catholic or Protestant? And we'd be like, both? You know, we've got both Catholic students and Protestant students. And having these, great conversations. And kids coming back going, wow, this reminds me a lot about like the polarity in our society and the way people talk about politics. And is it really grounded on anything important, or is it just stuff we put on ourselves? Like, kids are always changed by getting out of their environment.
Right.
But when they're immersed in something like that and they don't have a cell phone and they have to interact with the people around them, and they're pushed to do things that are kind of outside their comfort zone, whether it's actual physical service or just, I mean, we had a day in a little town in Ireland called Newry, and it was right around Mother's Day. And so we told the kids, here's buckets of flowers. You're going to go, anybody you see that's a mom, hand her a flower, you know, tell her you hope she's having a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Tell her where you're from, ask if you can pray with her, you know. And these kids, a lot of them were like, this is the worst thing I've ever done, you know. By the end of the day, all the kids were like, that was amazing, I had this experience, I met this person, you know. And to engage with the world in that way is not what we generally do with kids in society anymore.
Well, as an administrator too.
Yeah.
It's not what administrators did 13 years ago.
No.
I mean, you've got, at some point, you've got students from the school in another part of the world.
Right.
They're not just like going to the zoo.
No.
But they're in another country. That's got to be as a leader who's responsible for all this.
Yes.
That's got to be a weird feeling to think that there are students other places.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than any time one of these shootings or something happened. There's probably 2 or 3 days where I'm just like keeping it together, you know. And we have done and continue to do a huge amount of safety training, and obviously I won't go into details because that's the other thing, is we keep what we do very private to the staff that have to maintain it.
Right.
Because you know, when people entrust you with your kids, you want to do everything possible to make sure that you can protect them.
Yeah.
But it's tragic in this day and age that that's something we have to spend so much time thinking about.
Right.
And I have a huge amount of heartbreak. I mean, when we do lockdown drills and we do stuff like that at school, which feels tragic that you have to do it, but I remember one time, you know, when we do the drills, a few of us administrators will go through, we'll check all the doors, make sure everything's locked. And one time, you know, I'm going through, and we got a new lock system now that everything automatically locks when you close it, but this was before we implemented that as a result of this incident. I opened a door and the teacher had forgotten to lock the door. And you open the door and the room is dark and the kids are all, you know, behind a shelving in the corner, and all you see are these eyes. I mean, and I closed the door and I just burst into tears. I was like, what are we doing? This is the worst. I mean, it's just tragic that this is part of being able to meet in community, is to have to consider this piece of evil. And evil is real. And as much as we want to deny that evil is real, like, we have to think, what would evil do in these situations, and try to plan accordingly, and then have our children, even our youngest children, be savvy about that. And that's tough stuff, but we can't ignore it. You know, I can't pretend it's not happening. I wouldn't be doing my job. And instead I would rather, I mean, studies show that people that are empowered, that have thought about these things, that have learned this is what it looks like when this happens, as horrible as it is, they're able to make plans, and hopefully in the moment, in the urgency of a terrible situation, be prepared to take care of others, and to have the conversation, you know, Fred Rogers would always talk about when something terrible happens and you feel like hope is lost, look for the helpers.
Yeah.
Who are the people that are trying to help? Like, to have those conversations with children when they hear what's going on. We can't pretend that our kids don't know and understand that these things are happening in schools. So it's so much better to have the conversation with them, to be straightforward about it, to help them plan for what would you do if, how can you protect the people around you, how can you care for them. At least they're empowered and they have a plan when something like that comes up.
Yeah.
We can't pretend. I would love to wish it away and not have those conversations, but that's.
Yeah, I'm sure it's hard. It's just difficult. It seems like a lot of things in life are difficult right now.
Yeah.
Especially having come through COVID. That was. I mean, we're going to look back and say, "Oh yeah, I was there. That was really hard."
Yeah.
It's easier for me to say that now. I couldn't say that so much then, but it was really hard. How do you? Because you're kind of like a pastor over your teachers, your staff. How do you approach being there for them the way they need you to be there? Because you're one person, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, I think literally everybody on this campus views their role as pastoral. And actually, when COVID started, one of the best things we did was hire an inter-campus pastor. Eric Gravrock came on staff at that time, because we knew literally we couldn't hold chapel collectively anymore. And so he would spend an entire day going to every single classroom individually with all of our safety protocol in place, but leading some measure of worship, inviting kids to know Jesus, like having a measured time for that was huge. But we're always trying to be intentional, and I am myself, of how we live out what we believe, you know, and trying to do that. Every person's got their individual strengths, whatever they're designed with, and some are more gifted in certain areas. And I have an admin team. Like, I'm not a musical person, but you know, I've got people on my admin team. When I say, hey, can we do this with worship? And it's like, wow, they have this gift, you know, like, and I think that's one of the big issues in Christian schooling, is that most of us come from or have degrees that are for a public schooling background.
Right.
And then our biblical knowledge is just what we've picked up over time. Maybe we went to Christian colleges, but a lot of times that's not intentionally gained. And yet we do have this pastoral responsibility and this spiritual leadership responsibility. And it's a huge piece of it. And if we're not intentional about it, we have like biblical philosophy of education stuff that we make every staff member go through when they start here. So certain books they have to read to kind of make sure they understand the responsibility of that spiritual leadership piece.
Right.
And you know, for me, I always feel like a friend of mine, Alan Pugh, always said, you know, for your school to get better, you've got to get better first, which is a horrible feeling. I'm like, wow, if I don't take that seriously, who else does? You know, I don't have all the skills in all the areas, but I am a reader and a learner and a thinker, and I like to challenge others in that way. And so, whereas I know I'm not going to be like Eric Gravrock in the hallway with a student who's wrestling with something specific, I run a group called C.S. Lewis Scholars, which we have kids read 4 works from Lewis through the years, which he was hugely influential in my own faith over time. So for me to get to nerd out and talk about C.S. Lewis 4 times a year with kids, and literally if they graduate, they get this big medal at the end of the year, which a lot of the kids are kind of in it for the more bling they have at graduation. That's fine. To me, it's like if they're, you know, reading Mere Christianity,
if
or
they can get through Mere
Christianity,
Christianity, they deserve a medal or 2.
And these are 9th, 10th, 11th grade students that like they'll read it and we'll get to the conversation thing, and they'll be like, okay, these 3 chapters made no sense to me. And we'll talk about those, or there'll be one section of it where they're like, wow, that was like, you know, clarity about this issue for the first time, about, you know, prayer or some tiny, and I love talking about that kind of stuff. Like that's been a huge tank refiller in the position. But I feel like every single person on this campus has something like that is their gift and their contribution that they can engage with students in a unique way. And that's why there's something very special that happens in a Christian school when there's a whole bunch of people that come together that are committed to these kids having a very holistic education that is, you know, mind, body, and spirit. Because all these people can contribute different facets of that. And man, kids they get filled up. It's a good thing. It's good to be part of.
Erin, you are a gift. You are such a gift to this community. And I wanted people to see that, because I wanted them to hear that there's a person that's here, that this isn't administrative staff. You are a person who not only knows the school and loves the school, but was raised up through the school and knows that side of it too. And I just want to tell you thank you, because you may not, well, I don't know if you hear that enough, but thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being who you are and bringing yourself to the school in such a full way. It's really a huge blessing for our community.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. I'm blessed to get to do it. I always say, even in the last couple of years being as challenging as they are, it's a gift. You get to see kids grow. You get to see them launch out on life. You get to see facets of their character develop and know you had a piece of that. And partnering with parents to help them navigate this crazy world that we're in right now and raise kids is a huge gift. I don't discount the huge amount of trust that they give us, but also the gift it is to be part of people's lives.
Well, you're doing something really significant. Thank you.
Thanks.
We really hope today's episode was helpful. You'll find more resources and content to connect with other community leaders by going to our website, cityservecowlitz.org. So, it's been a joy to walk with you, and we'll see you soon.